Missouri is one of the most misunderstood states in America, not because people hate it, but because they think they already understand it. They don't. Missouri has been flattened into jokes, stereotypes, and half-truths that sound believable enough to repeat, but wrong enough to erase what the state actually is. These myths aren't random. They serve a purpose. They make Missouri easy to dismiss, easy to skip over, easy to reduce to a punchline or a red state cliché. And once a myth takes hold, it becomes easier to repeat than to question. Today we're breaking down 35 Missouri myths that refuse to die but aren't true. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why Missouri keeps getting misread and why that misunderstanding has lasted so long. Let's begin. 35. Missouri is just a flyover state. This is the myth everything else grows from. The foundation that makes all other misconceptions possible. Missouri has never been empty, irrelevant, or passive. It has been a transport, trade, and logistics core, quietly moving people, goods, and power across the country for nearly 2 centuries. The term flyover suggests there is nothing worth seeing between coasts. But Missouri was the launching point for westward expansion, a Civil War battleground, and remains a critical logistics hub today. You don't fly over unimportant places. You fly over functional ones, places so essential they have become invisible to people who benefit from them without knowing it. This myth survives because people confuse familiarity with knowledge. They have seen cornfields from airplane windows and assumed that was the whole picture. Missouri contains the Ozarks Mountains, ancient plateaus, over 6,000 documented caves, dramatic river bluffs, and dense forest systems. It is one of the most geologically diverse states in the Midwest, shaped by glaciers, rivers, and collapse systems over hundreds of millions of years. Flat is a shortcut word people use when they have not looked closely. It is intellectual laziness dressed as observation. Missouri's landscape is complicated. The myth persists because complicated does not fit on bumper stickers. 33. Nothing important ever happened in Missouri. The opposite is true, but Missouri's importance came without the dramatic framing that makes history memorable. Missouri has been central to westward expansion, Civil War conflict, trade routes, labor movements, and industrial logistics. The state shaped how America moved west, how the nation fractured over slavery, and how goods flow across the continent today. Missouri did not produce flashy moments designed for textbook highlights. It produced consequences, systems, patterns, and infrastructure that shaped American life without generating the cinematic moments that get remembered. Importance without spectacle becomes invisible. That's Missouri's curse. 32. Missouri was clearly Union or Confederate. This myth simplifies one of the messiest situations of the Civil War era. Missouri was both Union and Confederate, and neither cleanly. The state had 2 competing governments during the war. One aligned with the Union, operating from Jefferson City. One aligned with the Confederacy, operating in exile. Guerrilla warfare tore through communities. Families split. Neighbors killed neighbors. The violence was personal in ways that formal military campaigns elsewhere were not. Clean sides make history easier to tell. Missouri did not offer that luxury. It offered chaos, contradiction, and wounds that took generations to fade, if they ever did. 31. St. Louis failed because it was poorly run. St. Louis's decline is often framed as local incompetence, with bad leadership, poor decisions, and municipal failure. But St. Louis did not collapse overnight from mismanagement. Population shifts that favored the Sun Belt, frozen city borders from an 1876 decision to separate from St. Louis County, suburban flight enabled by federal highway policy, and capital flows that moved to growing regions all drained power slowly. Decline looks like mismanagement when you ignore context. St. Louis was caught in currents it did not create, and could not control. Those were national patterns that affected industrial cities across the Midwest. Blaming local leadership is easier than understanding systemic forces. 30. Missouri is culturally just Midwest. The Midwest label gets applied to Missouri like a blanket, covering everything and explaining nothing. Missouri sits at the intersection of Midwest farming culture, Southern traditions, Appalachian mountain heritage, and Great Plains influence. Each region of the state reflects different combinations of these forces. Northern Missouri feels like Iowa. Southern Missouri feels like Arkansas and Kentucky. St. Louis connects to eastern industrial cities. Kansas City connects to the plains and the West. That blend makes Missouri harder to label and easier to dismiss. When something does not fit a simple category, people often stop trying to understand it. 29. The Ozarks are often called backward or isolated. This myth reduces a complex mountain culture to a punchline about poverty and ignorance. The Ozarks developed in geographic isolation, but that isolation created self-reliance, not backwardness. Ozark communities built strong internal culture, preserved folk traditions, developed survival knowledge, and maintained independence from systems that failed other regions. What outsiders called backward was often adaptation. What they mocked as ignorance was frequently knowledge that did not match industrial-era metrics. The Ozarks were not behind. They were different, operating under different values and priorities. That difference threatened narratives about progress, so it got dismissed. Missouri never had political influence. This myth confuses visibility with power. Missouri shaped national compromises that delayed the Civil War for decades. It influenced voting blocs when its population was proportionally larger. It served as a political bellwether for generations, predicting presidential elections with remarkable accuracy. Political influence does not always wear a spotlight. It operates through leverage, positioning, and timing, none of which make good television. Missouri's political influence was real even when it was not celebrated. The state shaped outcomes that affected the entire nation, even if those contributions did not come with monuments. Number 27. Kansas City and St. Louis are basically the same. This myth treats Missouri's two major cities as interchangeable, both just Missouri cities without meaningful distinction. Kansas City and St. Louis developed under completely different economic, geographic, and cultural pressures. St. Louis grew as a river and rail hub connected to eastern industry. Kansas City grew as a gateway to the plains, shaped by the cattle trade and western expansion. Their architectures differ, their food cultures differ, their relationships to surrounding regions differ. Treating them as interchangeable erases both cities and demonstrates ignorance about what makes each distinctive. Missouri has two major cities. They are not the same city. 26. Missouri is just rural farmland. This myth reduces Missouri to endless fields, nothing but agriculture from border to border. Missouri has major urban centers housing millions of people. It has industrial corridors that once rivaled any in America. It has transportation hubs, research institutions, and economic activity that extends far beyond farming. Rural presence does not negate urban importance. Missouri contains both, and the interaction between rural and urban regions shapes the state's character in ways that neither alone could explain. Seeing only farmland means seeing only what confirms existing assumptions, not what actually exists. 25. Missouri never benefited from expansion. Missouri was the gateway to westward expansion. Surely it benefited from all that movement and opportunity. Missouri benefited and paid for it. Being a gateway means absorbing risk, conflict, and instability so others can move on. Missouri experienced the violence of expansion, the displacement of indigenous peoples, the infrastructure costs of enabling movement, and the cultural disruption of constant transition. The people who passed through took opportunity westward. Missouri kept the scars, the costs, and the aftermath. Benefits and costs aren't separate. Missouri received both, and the costs rarely get mentioned. If you're enjoying this breakdown of myths people repeat without checking, subscribe to Hard Truth Untold. This channel exists to challenge what sounds familiar but isn't accurate. Most channels repeat the comfortable version. We dig into the complicated truth. Hit subscribe and let's continue. Missouri has no distinct identity. People say Missouri lacks identity, that it is too mixed, too contradictory, too hard to pin down. But Missouri does not lack identity. It has too many identities, and that complexity makes people uncomfortable. The state contains Midwestern pragmatism, Southern hospitality, Appalachian independence, and frontier stubbornness, all layered together. None dominates completely. None disappears entirely. That is not absence of identity. That is the complexity of identity, and complexity does not fit on license plates or tourism campaigns. Missouri's identity crisis exists only in the minds of people who need simple categories. The state itself knows exactly what it is. Missouri has always been conservative. Contemporary political maps show Missouri as reliably red. People assume it was always this way. Missouri once housed strong labor movements, progressive reforms, and populist organizing. Socialist mayors governed Milwaukee's neighbor cities. Labor unions wielded significant power. Progressive-era reforms emerged from Missouri's policy experiments. Political identity here has shifted, not stayed fixed. The Missouri of 1920 looked nothing like the Missouri of 2020 politically. Assuming a permanent conservative identity erases a century of different politics. States change. Missouri's current alignment is not its eternal nature. 22. Missouri never innovated. Innovation gets associated with coastal tech hubs, Silicon Valley, Boston, and Seattle. Missouri does not fit that image. But Missouri innovated in logistics, agriculture, manufacturing, and transportation. It pioneered labor protections, developed agricultural techniques, and built infrastructure systems that enabled national commerce. Innovation is not only tech startups and apps. It is also figuring out how to move goods efficiently, how to grow food at scale, and how to organize labor fairly. Missouri's innovations were foundational rather than flashy. They enabled other people's success without generating the headlines that would have made Missouri famous for innovation. Number 21. Missouri is economically weak. This myth confuses quiet performance with poor performance. Missouri's economy is stable, diversified, and understated. It doesn't boom loudly, and that makes it invisible to observers looking for dramatic growth stories. The state has agriculture, manufacturing, healthcare, education, logistics, and service industries all operating simultaneously. That diversification provides stability that single industry states can't match. Economic strength doesn't always look like rapid growth. Sometimes it looks like steady function, not falling apart while flashier economies rise and crash around it. Missouri's economy isn't weak, it's just not loud. Missouri has no natural beauty. This myth survives because Missouri does not advertise itself aggressively. It does not have a marketing budget to match Colorado or California. But the natural beauty exists regardless of marketing. River bluffs rise hundreds of feet. Cave systems extend for miles underground. Forests cover the Ozark highlands. Karst landscapes create terrain unlike anywhere else in the region. You just have to look past the stereotypes. Missouri's beauty is not obvious from interstate highways designed to move through the state as quickly as possible. The beauty requires attention, and attention is exactly what the myths are designed to prevent. Number 19. Missouri didn't matter after the 1800s. Missouri's 19th century importance included westward expansion, the Civil War, and river trade, and it is occasionally acknowledged. But many people assume the state became irrelevant once those eras ended. Missouri mattered precisely because it stayed functional while attention moved elsewhere. It continued moving goods, producing food, and connecting regions long after the spotlight shifted to the coasts. Quiet relevance lasts longer than loud fame. Missouri remained essential to American logistics, agriculture, and transportation throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century. The attention left. The importance didn't. 18. Missouri is behind the times. This myth frames Missouri as slow, outdated, and unable to keep pace with modern America. Missouri adopted technologies and systems early, including railroads, electricity, and telecommunications. It just did not rebrand itself every decade to announce those adoptions. Being behind the times implies failure to adapt. Missouri adapted repeatedly to changing economic and technological conditions. The adaptations just were not marketed as transformation stories. Quiet competence looks like stagnation to people who measure progress by press releases. But the infrastructure works, the systems function, and life continues regardless of branding. 17. Missouri never had class conflict. The myth of Midwestern harmony suggests Missouri avoided the labor disputes and social tensions that affected other regions. Missouri experienced intense labor disputes, racial tension, and political fracture throughout its history. Mining strikes, factory conflicts, segregation battles, and political violence all occurred here. They were managed quietly, not erased. Missouri's conflicts didn't generate the national attention that similar conflicts received elsewhere, partly because Missouri lacked the media presence to broadcast its struggles. Quiet conflict is still conflict. Missouri's history includes class warfare that simply didn't make the national highlight reel. Number 16. Missouri is just a place people leave. Net migration statistics sometimes show more people leaving Missouri than arriving. This gets interpreted as failure, proof the state cannot retain residents. But people leave, and people stay. Migration patterns in Missouri reflect national trends. Young people moving to growing metros, retirees relocating to warmer climates, workers following jobs. These patterns affect every state. Missouri is not uniquely hemorrhaging population. It is participating in demographic movements that shape the entire country. Leaving is not rejection. Staying is not failure. Both are responses to circumstances beyond any state's complete control. 15. Missouri has no cultural export. This myth assumes culture flows from coasts toward the center, never the reverse. But music traditions, food cultures, political ideas, and regional language patterns have all moved outward from Missouri. Ragtime emerged from Missouri. Kansas City jazz shaped American music. Barbecue traditions spread nationally. Political innovations tested here influenced federal policy. Cultural export does not require branding. It does not require Missouri's name attached to every influence. Ideas and traditions spread without attribution all the time. Missouri exported more culture than it gets credit for. The credit just went elsewhere. 14. Missouri is easy to understand. People assume they understand Missouri because they have absorbed the stereotypes. Flyover state, conservative, rural, simple. But Missouri resists simple explanations. Its regional diversity, its layered history, its internal contradictions. None of it yields to a quick summary. That's exactly why myths persist. Simple explanations feel satisfying even when they're wrong. Complex explanations require effort that most people won't invest. Missouri remains misunderstood because understanding it requires work. The myths survive because they're easier than accuracy. 13. Missouri was never divided. This myth imagines Missouri as unified, a coherent state with a shared identity and purpose. Division is part of Missouri's structure, both geographically and culturally. Northern Missouri differs from southern Missouri. Urban Missouri differs from rural Missouri. River regions differ from interior regions. These divisions are not failures of unity. They are features of a state that spans multiple American regions without belonging entirely to any. Pretending Missouri was ever unified causes misunderstanding. The state has always contained multitudes that do not fully agree, and acknowledging that is more honest than pretending otherwise. 12. Missouri's history is settled. History feels settled when textbooks present it as complete narratives. Missouri's history appears in chapters with clear endings, but many questions in Missouri were postponed, not resolved. Civil War tensions did not fully heal, racial injustices were not fully addressed, economic transitions were not fully completed. Settled history is comfortable. Unsettled history creates obligations. Missouri's history remains uncomfortably unfinished in ways that surface periodically in contemporary conflicts. The past is not past here. It is still working itself out. Number 11. Missouri is politically predictable. Missouri's recent voting patterns might suggest predictability, a reliable red state, and expected outcomes. But Missouri shifts with pressure, not ideology. Its political identity has changed repeatedly over its history, responding to economic conditions, demographic changes, and cultural shifts. That unpredictability confuses national narratives that want states locked into permanent categories. Missouri has been progressive, conservative, swing, and everything between, depending on circumstances. What seems predictable now is just a snapshot. The underlying complexity remains, waiting for conditions that might shift patterns again. 10. Missouri is Middle America in the simplest sense. Middle America gets used as shorthand for ordinary, average, unremarkable. Missouri sits geographically central, so it must represent the American middle. But Missouri is a crossroads, not a midpoint. Crossroads are where different forces meet, collide, and interact. Midpoints are just locations on a line. Missouri's centrality made it a place where different American currents intersected, not a place that averaged them into blandness. The crossroads identity is more interesting than the midpoint identity, but midpoint is easier to dismiss, so that is the myth that stuck. Number 9. Missouri has no role in modern America. This myth assumes Missouri's relevance ended when its historical moments concluded. It belongs to the past, not the present. But Missouri still moves goods, food, labor, and infrastructure across the country. It still feeds agricultural supply chains, still anchors transportation networks, and still functions as connective tissue in the American economy. Modern relevance doesn't require headlines. It requires function, and Missouri functions. The role isn't glamorous, it's essential. Those are different things, and modern America needs essential more than it needs glamorous. 8. Missouri doesn't shape national outcomes. This myth imagines outcomes emerging from power centers, Washington, New York, and Los Angeles, without input from places like Missouri. But supply chains decide outcomes. Food systems decide outcomes. Logistics decide outcomes. Transportation infrastructure decides outcomes. Missouri sits on all of them. What happens in Missouri affects what's possible everywhere else. Disruptions here ripple outward. Efficiency here enables activity elsewhere. Missouri shapes outcomes through function, not fame. The influence is real, even when it's unacknowledged. 7. Missouri lacks ambition. This myth frames Missouri as complacent, satisfied with mediocrity, and lacking the drive for excellence. Missouri prioritizes stability over spectacle. That's a choice, not a flaw. Ambition that produces volatility is not obviously superior to steadiness that produces reliability. Different values lead to different priorities. Missouri's priorities include functioning consistently rather than booming and busting. Calling that lack of ambition reflects bias toward a particular definition of success. Other definitions exist, and Missouri operates under them. 6. Missouri is stuck in the past. This myth suggests Missouri hasn't moved forward, that it remains trapped in earlier eras while the rest of America progresses. Missouri carries its past forward, sometimes uncomfortably. Historical patterns, unresolved conflicts, and cultural inheritances remain present in ways that more amnesiac states have abandoned. That's different from being stuck. Carrying history isn't the same as being unable to change. Missouri changes while remaining connected to what came before. The past is present here. That's complexity, not stagnation. Number 5. Missouri was never important enough to be ignored. This myth suggests ignoring Missouri is natural, the appropriate response to something that does not matter. But ignoring something repeatedly is proof it matters. You do not work to avoid things that do not affect you. You only ignore what you would rather not engage with. Missouri gets ignored because engaging with it would complicate comfortable narratives. The ignoring is active, not passive, a choice made repeatedly to avoid complexity. Things that do not matter get forgotten. Things that are ignored are remembered and deliberately set aside. Missouri is defined by what it isn't. This myth frames Missouri negatively, as not coastal, not southern, not western, and not quite Midwestern. That idea treats Missouri as a definition by absence, but Missouri is defined by what it holds together. Multiple identities, competing influences, and contradictory histories are all contained within one border. That is not an absence of identity. That is a presence of complexity. Missouri's definition is additive, not subtractive, and it is more than one thing rather than less than other places. The negative framing says more about the people doing the framing than about Missouri itself. Number 3. Missouri is forgettable. This myth suggests Missouri naturally slips from memory, not important enough to retain. People do not forget things that do not matter. They forget things that do not fit. Missouri does not fit the stories America tells about itself. It complicates narratives that work better without it, so it gets excluded from memory, not because it is unimportant, but because it is inconvenient. Forgettable is a judgment disguised as description. Missouri is forgotten because remembering it would require rethinking assumptions people prefer to keep intact. Section 2. Missouri's myths are harmless. This myth treats Missouri stereotypes as innocent humor, jokes without consequences. But myths erase complexity, and they erase people. When Missouri is reduced to punchlines, the people who live there become invisible. Their experiences, their challenges, their contributions disappear into stereotypes. Harmless jokes about places become harmful assumptions about populations. Policy follows perception. Investment follows attention. When attention is withdrawn because of myths, real consequences follow. Missouri's myths are not harmless. They are mechanisms of erasure operating through humor. 1. Missouri is exactly what you've been told. This is the most persistent myth of all, the assumption that inherited knowledge about Missouri is accurate. Missouri isn't simple. It isn't empty. It isn't irrelevant. It isn't boring. It isn't flyover. It isn't the shortcuts that have been passed down through jokes, stereotypes, and casual dismissals. Missouri is a state that refuses to fit the stories America prefers to tell, and that's exactly why the myths survive. They're easier than truth, more comfortable than complexity, more convenient than engagement. But easier, more comfortable, and more convenient aren't the same as accurate. Missouri deserves better than the myths it's been given. Which Missouri myth have you heard the most? And if you are from Missouri, which one frustrates you every time you hear it? Drop it in the comments. I read them all, and your perspective helps shape future episodes. There is another Missouri video right now that digs even deeper into what the state actually is, beneath the stereotypes. Subscribe to Hard Truth Untold, because the most persistent myths are usually the most comfortable ones. And comfortable is not the same as true.